Ooh, laser pointer. All right. Welcome to Critical Studies lecture tonight. Thanks for coming, everybody. I know it's the first inaugural Hurricane Sandy meets Frankenstorm Critical Studies lecture series. So, for those of you that don't know, I'm Mark Newport, head of the Fiber Department here at the Academy, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Jessica Hemmings and welcome her back to Cranbrook. She was here a couple of years ago to do critiques, and so it's great to have her back to do a lecture. It's almost like over multiple years we can get one whole visit in, right? So, little introduction and we'll get to the meat of the matter. Jessica Hemmings writes about textiles. She also writes about fiction that contains textiles, materials that remind us of textiles and other things, as long as they are interesting. And I think that's how we should all do things, interesting and textiles. She studied textile design at Rhode Island School of Design. She graduated with a BFA in 1999 and did comparative literature at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, earning an MA in 2000. Her PhD was awarded by the University of Edinburgh in 2006 and is published by Calliope Paperbacks under the title Yvonne Vieira, The Voice of Cloth. She's written articles and exhibition reviews for publications such as Crafts, Selvage, and the Surface Design Journal. In 2010, she edited a collection of essays entitled In the Loop, Knitting Now, published by Black Dog, and has recently compiled the Textile Reader for Berg. She's also just published a book called Warp and Weft for ANC Black. And she has taught at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, the RISD, Winchester School of Art, and Edinburgh College of Art. She's currently the professor of visual culture and head of the Faculty of Visual Culture at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, Ireland. So please welcome Jessica.
Thank you very much for that introduction and the invitation to speak this evening. I didn't bring the storm with me. The weather in Ireland is atrocious. The weather in Scotland is atrocious. My career is not on a positive climate trajectory, but I do apologize for the weather you've got now. I don't think this time that actually Europe was responsible for it. I think it has come from somewhere else. The talk that I've put together for you this evening comes out of some interests that I have, my background in literature as well as textiles, and also an emphasis which I should probably make clear I do acknowledge is something that Britain and Europe is contending with at the moment. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it in an American context, but that's our current obsession with collaborative practice as an ideal model for research. And this is something that the UK and the EU in general have got their teeth so far into that it made me stop and pause and try and understand why I was being such a poor show at contributing to these sorts of projects. What is it about collaboration that makes me nervous rather than makes me excited? And so a lot of the information that I've put together this evening is in that context of a research funding climate that is on the other side of the Atlantic. But please do jump in at the end if you feel like there are parallels or real differences that the States, I know that our funding models are completely different in both places. So introversion and knitting. My background is in textiles, but one of the things that I've started to think about more closely recently is maybe how much more particular we need to be about different types of textile practice when we speak about it, that there are certain textile processes that are very unique as far as the qualities that they have. And even somebody like me maybe is a little bit sloppy sometimes when they say textiles do this or craft does this. So bear with me, knitting is a model. It is the slight obsession of these examples that I've pulled together. But I think it's because I've come to realize recently that it has some particularities to it as a textile process, which maybe even I hadn't noticed about it in the past. It's also a way of working that comes with a loaded set of stereotypes and imagery surrounding it. And that's another reason why I'm interested in maybe trying to question some of those rather loose or sloppy images that we have of knitting. So to begin at the beginning, to begin where I know a lot of people do begin, this idea of what makes us happy at the moment in this material world that we live in, which at least in North America and Europe is so very rich as far as the stuff that we have. Despite the fact that we're now healthier and grow to be older, despite the fact that even the least affluent among us are surrounded by material luxuries in North America and Europe only, undreamed of even a few decades ago, and regardless of all of the stupendous scientific knowledge we can summon at will, people often end up feeling that their lives have been wasted, that instead of being filled with happiness, their years were spent in anxiety and boredom. And this classic text about flow goes on to talk about how do we get that happiness back into lives which are, on one level, tick all the boxes. Why, if we're ticking all the boxes, are we not overwhelmed with our own happiness and our well-being? And one of the chapters in Flow, the classic work on how to achieve happiness, talks about what I think many people in an art and design context would very much understand to be what happens in the studio, this moment when you are lost in the process of what you're making. And this, I would have to say, is not remotely specific to textiles, that many hand processes and writing as a craft also enjoy this. People describe the common characteristics of optimal experience, which is what this flow moment is, a sense of one's skills adequate to cope with the challenges at hand, goal-oriented, rule-bound action system that provides us clear clues on how we are performing. Concentration is intense, no attention left over to think about anything irrelevant. You're not worrying about your bank account, you're not worrying about your overdraft or your dry cleaning. You're doing something that is totally consuming. Self-consciousness disappears, sense of time is distorted, which I think the craft practices in general often talk about, being so absorbed in something and looking up and not realizing what's happened to the clock. An activity that produces such experience is so gratifying, people are willing to do it for its own sake. That would be a whole nother paper about the economics of craft and whether we should think that's a good thing. But it's done for pleasure, with little concern to what they'll get out of it, even when it's difficult or dangerous. I think that a lot of the hand-making traditions that we have provide exactly these sorts of clues. Here we have artists close to home to you, I know, Miller and Schellebang, working on a project which I find fascinating in light of this idea about knitting and its ability to be a group activity and be an individual's activity at the same time. And I think that one of the things that I'm interested in understanding about knitting is this duality that it provides. It can be collaborative. The classic, very popular culture example at the moment is the boom in knitting clubs, the fact that you would get together. That's not collaborative in a conventional sense of the word, but it's incredibly social. Potentially, it's an extroverted activity. It's something that you very much want to do in public, and you're gaining energy from the people around you. But a project like this mediates that, it negotiates that. It is a little bit of that. It's providing that connection, but at the same time, there's an individual, there's a solitary identity that's also preserved. For those of you less familiar with this project, it's a type of project that's been accumulating over time. The couple only work on it together, so it's not a case of one person can pick it up at the expense of another. So it really is a manifestation, a map, a calendar of their relationship, as well as their artistic commitment. I was interested in this idea of knitting as a social activity, and so I started to look around at knitting as something that was inherently extrovert, something that we want to do in public, something that we do in order to meet other people, to connect with communities. The previous project that I've just shown you is written up, if you Google it, talking about the fact that this is an incredibly extroverted activity, which the artist would deny, that they wouldn't agree with that. The fact that you put something out in public doesn't necessarily mean that you're extroverted. But I think that a lot of knitting projects do have this sense of being incredibly open and social in their endeavors. So this is Anna Malt's project from quite some time ago now, with different families who wore these knitted costumes. On one hand, entirely innocent. We've got some gender bending going on in this one. Not the type of project to be created by a shrinking violet or a wallflower, nor the people who have agreed to wear her costumes. Something that's incredibly confident and out there, and engaging in something that is very public-facing, as well as having these intimacies tied up to it. Olek, another example of a person who this time is using crochet, but to create a type of work which is very Tracey Emin-esque. That's where the title is actually a connection to a Tracey Emin quilt. And there's this idea of very much putting yourself out there. There are texts included in these installations which come from text messages that she's sent, very much about her sex life, about her intimacies, about her failed relationships, very Emin-like in that sense. Not something that is inward-looking or private or reflective on any level. To enter this installation, like many things, you take your shoes off, and now you're surrounded by this world of language and image, which initially you might not be able to decipher all of the pieces, but once you start to look closely, you realize that you're reading things about her private life that you probably wouldn't have chosen to, except it's so embedded in the textile that you've stared at it long enough before you actually focus on what it is. You've taken on board information that you might otherwise have not needed to know. So this, I think, is what knitting at the moment is something that we connect it to. It's very, very extrovert. It's exposing lots of powerful, very, very confident positions about information that we might have otherwise kept private. But I struggle with the fact that you have that type of contemporary creative practice occurring. And then when you look to literature and film, which are areas that I tend to look to try and find other information about textile practice, the idea of a person, and it usually is a woman, constructing the textile, particularly the knitted textile alone, is not positive. It's usually something that has suggestions of loneliness, of something that isn't maybe elected or chosen, but is something that is to pass time, to ward off the solitude, as opposed to this idea of wanting that solitude as something that is chosen and elected. So we have literature and film who represent the lone knitter as something that is essentially disturbed, the female lone knitter. Mark mentioned that my PhD was on a Zimbabwean author called Yvonne Vieira. This is a piece of text from Vieira's writing, which I found interesting because she tends to use the textile to speak of moments, particularly of abuse and sadness, which would be very difficult to package in language otherwise. The textile often ends up doing the hard work in her narratives. So here she's talking about a woman who has not been treated very well. Zandili turned left on Thandinini Street and walked quickly past number 62 Thandinini, where she knew a woman whose husband had sold her to another man for the value of a bicycle wheel. But she refused to leave and instead stood on that asbestos roof with no clothes at all to cover her own body and announced loud and clear that she preferred 2 bicycle wheels to 1. And if anyone had 2 bicycle wheels to give her husband, then she would leave not only the rooftop, but the house and the foolishness of her husband. This number 62 Thandanini woman, nameless other than an address, could be seen outside her house any time of the day, knitting whatever she could, a full candle burning beside her, whether it was morning or night. This isn't the knitting in Starbucks for the downtime at the end of a busy professional day. This is knitting that is suggesting that the character is having some sort of breakdown, a justified breakdown, in light of the way that she's been treated as not even a whole object. But the idea that she's knitting, that the candle is burning even though that there's daylight, that this is knitting as a compulsion to fill up time that is otherwise absolutely racked with sadness. Jumping to the other side of the world, we've got really curious examples in film. This is a Japanese film called Wool, 100%. It's a non-linear narrative, which by coincidence, Yvonne Vieira's narratives are completely non-linear as well. We have these two sisters in the grey bobbed haircuts in the foreground of the picture, living together. And they are visited by this younger woman who is wearing this red knitted garment, which throughout the whole entire film is being knitted and at the moment of its completion immediately unraveled. Something, it's a cycle of some sort, and there are many readings that you could put onto it. The sisters don't have children of their own. They are compulsive collectors, as you can see here, chock-a-block full of stuff that they go out and find. And when they're visited by this person, there's some sort of narrative to do with a woman's fertility or the older woman's lack of fertility and a lack of children that are in the house. But something constantly goes wrong with this knitting. This is not knitting that is fulfilling anyone, because when this shape, this cocoon that she's wearing, starts to be finished, it is never allowed to stay that way. It's always absolutely undone. And then you get these flashbacks to other types of knitting. It's easy to read that the bobbed haircuts there are now a flashback to the two sisters as younger girls. There's some sort of suggestion to abuse or violence in their past. It's not the type of film that watching it over and over again with a notebook, like a person like me does, actually ends up giving you a full story. There's also, in the version that I have, which is subtitled, there is an interview in Japanese with the director, which I've had translated, and it does not give anything away either. It says not to read too much into it. It is in the land of fairy tale. But I do think that it's fascinating that we've got this Halloween wreaking its havoc on us early. Here we go. So that gives you just a little taster of another narrative where knitting is absolutely central to some type of construction that is occurring. Women are on the one hand providing company for each other, but as that soundtrack, irritating though it might have been for 20 seconds, goes on for hours in this film. Every time this piece of knitting reaches a point where you think it's going to be concluded, the screaming starts, it has to be unraveled, torn apart, and starts all over again. So there's some type of frustrated fertility or infertility, and certainly some sense that this construction is troubled. This is not knitting for productive, solitary, soothing activity at all. And then my final classic example of troubled knitters, of course, is Madame Defarge from A Tale of Two Cities. Those of you that remember, she is basically using what Dickens refers to as a knitted register. She's knitting, embedding text again, which is something I find fascinating, embedding words, names into knitting that is being overlooked because it isn't an official register, so say. It's not written on a piece of paper, but they are the names of people who are going to lose their lives in the guillotine. So this is not happy knitting either. This is knitting for something that is very troubled and disturbed. So I worry about these things. Why do we have all of these unhappy knitters sprinkled across our literature and our films? And what about productive solitary knitting chosen as a pastime as opposed to forced upon someone, or unproductive solitary knitting, which is what I've just shown you? As I explained, part of my interest in what this might be comes from the fact that in the EU and the UK at the moment, research in general needs to be either interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. The AHRC, Britain's Arts and Humanities Research Council, will not fund anything if it is not collaborative. It's not even up for discussion. You don't have to say why it would be good that it isn't collaborative. If the bid is not collaborative in the first place, it's not even a viable proposal. So that's really got me thinking about these moments where it is productive to work alone. And it led me to a recently published text by Susan Cain called "Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking." And Cain writes very much with a management perspective in the foreground of her mind. I think it's fair to say that she is trying to get people to understand that the world is made of introverts and extroverts, potentially about 50-50. But we think that introverts are the minority because extroverts tend to be a bit louder. But that doesn't mean that there aren't many introverts masquerading as extroverts, because that's how culture at the moment values communication. And so a lot of what she writes about tries to debunk quite a few myths about why collaboration is something that's so productive. And she unearths some information that suggests that it's not that productive. Multitasking doesn't really work. If you want people to do something that's new and innovative, the surest way to innovation is to lock someone in a cabin alone, not put them by the donuts and the coffee machine in an open plan office. So Cain talks about introverts prefer to work independently. Solitude is a catalyst for innovation, totally the opposite of what we tend to think of. But the way we organize many of our most important institutions, our schools, our workplaces, tells a different story. The new groupthink elevates teamwork above all else. It insists that creativity and intellectual achievement come from a gregarious place. And then she goes on to try and understand how we arrived at this moment and why we have these ideas that are not actually any longer backed up by any statistical evidence that they're working. So she talks about collaboration became a sacred concept, the key multiplier for success. And she likens it to the internet, which I do find really interesting. We took things a step further than the facts called for. We came to value transparency and to knock down walls, not only online, but also in person. We failed to realize that what makes sense for the asynchronous, relatively autonomous interactions of the internet might not work as well inside the face-to-face, politically charged, acoustically noisy, if they don't have enough textiles, confines of an open plan office. Even multitasking, the prized feat of modern-day office worker warriors, turns out to be a myth. Scientists now know that the brain is incapable of paying attention to two things at the same time. What looks like multitasking is really switching back and forth between multiple tasks, which reduces productivity and increases mistakes by up to 50%. So I found this a very heartening read when I was trying to understand why I was refusing to write all these collaborative research bids myself and what sort of grumpy person I had become. And I think that for me at least, it stems from this idea of having an understanding of what is productive for me and an understanding of what is not productive, although it happens to be a hugely popular way of describing work at the moment. So if we have bought ourselves that tiny bit of breathing room to say that it is all right to work alone, maybe not by the AHRC's standards, but there are reasons, there are moments, very valid ones, that working alone can actually be hugely productive and hugely instrumental, then I started to search for what those might be. I was worried about these images of working alone, knitting alone in literature and film always being unhappy. When you speak to people about that experience, it's usually very positive. So we have this representation in other disciplines which is not matching reality. And then I tried to unearth some projects that were successful on the grounds of some type of solitary production. The Lionheart project was a cultural Olympiad project in the UK. So as part of the Olympics that London had this past summer, there was a budget set aside for support for the visual arts, so that there was a sense that alongside the Olympics and this investment in sport came a general investment in cultural projects that ran alongside that particular calendar. And what you're looking at here are absolutely giant crocheted lions, which have been placed in this glass box, which was towed around the country so that it could be viewed in lots of different venues around the time and shortly after the time of the Olympics. And what I found interesting about this project is the scale is enormous. Sometimes we think about the fact that maybe if you work alone, that means that you are limited to a certain way of working or a certain output. And if you work together, that immediately becomes multiplied. Not true at all with this project. So here we have the artist who hand crocheted all of these panels, which were then applied to the lion shapes. She worked entirely alone for this project. In some ways, when you look at it, it would be the classic project to have as a group project or a collaboration. But that was not what this particular person needed in order to do this work. They're not small. So this is her explanation. Undertaking a project like this as a lone artist with no experience, contacts, or guidance was plain bonkers. But perhaps working alone is the reason the project has been so successful to date. And this is what I find really interesting at the moment. Collaboration is something that is incredibly popular as a buzzword. I have grave suspicions about how many times it actually delivers. And so what she's saying is, I had to work on this all by myself to make sure it happened. And scale wasn't really an issue or the object at all. I feel responsible for every aspect. When problems arise, I don another hat, find more hours, fix them. It's all on her shoulders, but actually that means even though it's huge, it happened. Here's Liz Hoggard, the journalist who interviewed Richardson for the Crafts article, talking about her explanation of the project. She turned down friends who offered to help with the stitching because it felt like cheating. To have others doing even one stitch would be like completing a marathon, knowing that you'd taken a lift for the first couple of meters. There's something about this investment in this work, regardless of it was a very compressed time frame that she was working within, but actually secured its survival rather than made it a higher risk project to deliver on time. To complete a crochet project of this length, it's necessary to zone everything out, exactly what Flo talks about at the beginning, and sustain a state of mind driven by rhythm and process. It's a daily source of wonder just how I managed it, but the figures seem to be adding up as predicted. And so here's the artist with her creations. And I think that sense of responsibility and ownership actually is something that becomes an enormous weak link in collaborative projects, and something that didn't faze her when she took on something of such what we might want to argue is slightly ridiculous scale that she tried to tackle. Not the only person to say that working alone is a nice or a productive way of working. Mark and I talked about this back in the summertime. I knew of Mark's work from the In the Loop knitting book that I edited a few years ago. And I was aware, working on that project, of people who made it very clear in explaining their practice to me, the ways that they needed to work. But what I think is interesting is that that isn't always how it seems from the outside. So here we go. He should be speaking for himself, but I decided to be strict with myself and not take out these slides. I did have a moment. But weaving, knotting, embellishment, knitting, I've used for their social connotations in relation to gender, but more personally, they provide the space that I prefer. Quiet, controlled, primarily alone, to think in a way that I feel is non-linear, which interestingly is what always comes up in the film and the narrative that I've found as well. That could be because that's what I'm interested in, but this idea of slowing down and taking time, and that not necessarily being at the mercy of some sort of ruthless chronology, which I feel is non-linear, slower, and at times more long-term than short-term problem solving. But then the thing that I find interesting, and this is the tricky bit when we're looking at projects from a distance, is this sense that they could look like they're group projects, they could look like they're quite extroverted activities because they tend to be public-facing. And Doots and Stan's images in the very beginning have that tension in them as well, but actually it's not. It's a little bit of both going on. So Mark explains, I'm intrigued by social large-scale group projects with knitting and other textile processes. I've knit with other folks as a way of doing events at museums for opening members. So this isn't about hiding away in the studio and being totally intolerant to audience or public consumption of your work. It's nothing like that. It's the state of mind that you're in when you're making the work. So he says, I knit in public when I travel, on the plane or in the lobby of a bus, but then he differentiates that and says, I don't think of this as working with a group. And this is something that Kane is quite sophisticated in separating out in her survey of introverts and extroverts as well. It's not that introverts are somehow public shy or lacking in confidence, and it's not that well, maybe I shouldn't speak to the other side of it. That's not what introverts are, but they are the type of person who loses energy when they're with people, and extroverts gain energy when they're with people. So that doesn't mean that introverts should never be with people. It means that you need to negotiate how you spend your time so that it's most productive. And in the same way, you couldn't lock an extrovert in a studio with nobody to talk to for weeks on end and expect them to be happy and productive. It will backfire in exactly the inverse way. So to move on to what this might mean, I've been speaking to some people who are not working in the arts at all, are coming from a completely different context when looking at this type of work. And this is a quote from a report that came out this summer about the therapeutic benefits of knitting. And it's based in the UK. The UK has a public healthcare system, which means that you're not paying for any of your medical care. The tax money is underwriting the NHS. And the UK, like most places at the moment, is in financial trouble. And so that means that they have a model of delivering medical health care to a country which is not sustainable. That doesn't sound good, that doesn't sound positive, but what some researchers have noticed is that this is cracking open opportunities that wouldn't have existed before this economic crisis. Because things cannot be funded in the way they have been funded in the past. And that means that proposals that might have been dismissed or slightly poo-pooed or left aside are now actually able to get a little bit more traction than has been enjoyed in the past. So here's Corkhill talking about the fact that the current model of healthcare, it's unsustainable in the UK, the free NHS system, particularly for long-term conditions, in the sense that somebody who's on a long-term prescription, the tax base is not able to fund the NHS into the medium-term future. And people are understanding that research is needed to find out ways of tapping into the body's own healing mechanisms. Interestingly, her agenda, of course, is that knitting can be a contributing factor to this. But she points out that the only reason that she's been able to get any space in hospitals or onto any type of research projects to study this at the moment is basically because we have run out of choices. A few years ago, it would have been fine to say, well, we'll keep filling the prescriptions, we'll keep making the doctor's visits. So knitting is that thing that's just not important enough. There's no way it can be a viable intervention. That skepticism in some ways has dropped its guard a little bit, only because there's a lot less to lose now. Something has to be done that is more sustainable, and it's breaking open some research opportunities which would have very much been closed in the past. And so one of the things that I find most interesting in light of the examples that I've just spoken to you about with regards to knitting is actually the specificity of knitting in helping some of these problems. So it's actually not, if I'm understanding this research correctly, not appropriate to talk about the arts or crafts as therapeutic models. There are rather particular things about knitting physically as a process, which is unlocks therapeutic options that other types of work don't. So she talks about the fact she's a specialist in pain management, but there is other research that's occurring around mental health, dementia, and addiction. Therapeutic knitting groups promote purpose, creativity, success, reward, and enjoyment, which is particularly important in individuals who have no experience of these in other aspects of their lives. It's tangible. And that's what a lot of people talk about when they say, I met with the students earlier, you're knitting, you might not exactly know what you're meant to do today or not have the clearest idea. I'm going to produce something, and that unlocks other ideas inside my head, and it's important that it's physical, that it's out there. So in this context, she's working with people who have multiple other problems in their lives, whether it's the loss of a job because of an injury, other social or physical problems that they're dealing with. And knitting has these rather unexpected benefits. First of all, it's incredibly low cost. It's incredibly low risk. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. It wasn't a ridiculously expensive pharmaceutical experiment. It was the offer to knit. There are other things about the fact that it's entirely portable. Even something as basic as painting or ceramics requires really specialist situations, specialist equipment. The fact that knitting doesn't really leave too much of a mess, too many traces, that it gets picked up and put down, which is sort of the classic cliche of what women's work is, actually makes it incredibly functional within the hospital environment if you're to go in and suggest this as an alternative for some of the patients. She talks about the fact that the main issues which raise knitting above the other crafts center on the nature of its movements, the development of creative ability, portability, and the way it enables group participation. Now, I know I've been banging on about solitary activity, but knitting seems to be able to do two things. It's both a group activity and a solitary activity. And then there's something about the fact that it is a bilateral movement. So if you think of weaving as being something that you very much sit, first of all, at a piece of equipment, which is very specialist. You're not going to nip in and out of somebody's hospital room with it. And then the motions of weaving and many other textile techniques don't cross the center line of your body. And they're beginning to understand that there's something about that motion which is incredibly powerful in its regenerative abilities when it comes to helping stroke victims and other sorts of recuperation. So the movement's bilateral, rhythmic, repetitive, and automatic. These coordinated movements engage more brain activity than unilateral ones and appear to facilitate a meditative-like state. That's that same flow state that we talked about earlier, but this time it's actually being underpinned with really constructive medical reasons. Unilateral ones and appear to facilitate a meditative-like state more readily than unilateral movements. We know that the midline of the body is a particular reference point for the brain. Movements which cross over this seem to be particularly important. And I find this research really fascinating in light of the very light image that knitting seems to have in our society today. It is something that has had a resurgence, and that resurgence tends to center around bringing communities together and group activity, and none of that needs to be questioned or denied, but that's not the only contribution that it's able to make. And what this project is beginning to understand is that it has quite a sophisticated capacity to help the body repair, as long as the knitter is at regular intervals being challenged to pick up new information. So apparently the trick from a therapeutic point of view is it's not a case to knit the same pattern for 6 months, because you tip too far into the automatic, and that doesn't trigger the brain to work hard enough. So the only glitch with this is it can be introduced into these contexts, and then there have to be further levels of encouragement so that it's constantly about acquiring new skill on new skill. This isn't old. This isn't new news, rather. This has been around for some time. Sabrina Gunstenwater, what I'm interested in here is the image on the very, very top left of your screen, men knitting in a San Francisco prison. There are also images, of course, of men and women from the military recuperating and knitting. So this is knowledge that we have had for quite some time, but like so many things, maybe something that got a little bit overlooked, washed away in tides of other popularities. And the irony is that at the moment, with all of the economic problems that the world is facing, it seems as though that's actually opening up spaces for these activities that have been disregarded to move back into more powerful and more constructive positions. And so Corkill concludes, and I will as well, she talks about the fact that knitting also provides us with a delineation of our personal space. This can be incredibly important for somebody who struggles to use something like public transport because of agoraphobia or concerns about being in control of the situation that they're in. And it provides a physical buffer. If you're taking that knitting on the bus, you've actually got something. You don't have to confront somebody. You've sort of got a reason why there should be a little bit more space around you to keep you comfortable. And then finally, she talks about this thing which I think is this beautiful tension that we have in knitting, and maybe deserves a little bit more attention than it's had in the past. It is a group activity. That's our classic understanding of it. But she talks about the fact that knitting is one of few activities which enables eye contact during conversation. Not me, because I'm not very good at it, but if you're good at it, you don't have to look at what you're doing. I can look at you while my hands are knitting. But at the same time, if for some personal reason that's a problem, and I can't become a part of a group because I find that too uncomfortable, then you don't have to have eye contact. You can look down at what you're doing, and you can use that as a way to mediate an experience that otherwise is rife with anxiety. So it's got this potential to connect people and be part of a group, and it's absolutely combined with the fact that it can be solitary. So in the therapeutic setting, the idea is that people would come together in a group to learn something, but unlike many other activities, it then gets taken home with them. And it's that tension which seems to be allowing it to be much more constructive than some other type of craft activities. And so I leave you with this image, because I think it's another beautiful example of exactly what that is. It is a solitary activity, and it can also be a group activity at the same time. It is connecting people together, but that connection doesn't have to be the only way that we read it, because there's something about making sure that that solitary activity is something that is understood to be equally constructive, which I think we need to pay a bit more attention to. Thank you.